very much. So maybe you may not know this, but a couple of years ago, I had the privilege of being at CPAC, and I gave a speech in which I said, the conference was titled, "Dude, Where's My Candidate?" This year, we might be asking the question, "Dude, where's my country?" Last year when I was here, it was in the final days of my campaign, though I was hoping it wasn't the final days of my campaign. And it was at that time that I talked about the fact that I didn't major in math, but in miracles. And I was still hoping for one. Well, it didn't happen. But life has been good over the past year. And I ended up with a gig on the Fox News channel, and I'm extremely grateful for that. And having the And of course, now I'm in a different kind of competition. There are those other cable channels. There's the one that just this week finally got religion. You know which one I'm talking about, the one we now call the Oh God channel, after Chris Matthews finally realized there was a God and called it out just before Governor Jindal's speech the other night. Some of us call that not the MSNBC, but the MSBS channel, more appropriately. Well, at the schoolhouse every Christmas, it was typical that the teacher would receive gifts from some of the kids. And you might imagine that many of the kids would bring things that related to what their parents did. The teacher kind of knew this, and so as they were gathering up their gifts that day, the teacher called upon a little boy. The little boy's father had a candy store, so she kind of expected what the gift would be, and she said, "Oh, I bet you brought me some of that wonderful candy from your dad's store." The little boy's face lit up. He said, "Yes, ma'am, that's exactly right." She took the candy, set it aside. The little girl came up with her gift. Now, she knew that the little girl's father had a florist, and she said, "Oh, I bet you brought me some wonderful flowers from your dad's florist shop." The little girl's eyes lit up, and her face got wide-eyed, and she said, "Yes, that's exactly right." The teacher said, "Well, thank you so very much." Another little boy was coming up, and the teacher knew that the father of that little boy had a liquor store. And as she received the box, she noticed that it was moist at the bottom of the box. So, like Sarah, I guess we're a finger-licking family. But she took a taste and she said, "Oh, I see, you brought me some of that wonderful wine from your dad's store." And the little boy said, "Well, no, ma'am." She tried it again. She said, "Oh, I guess that's some of that delightful brandy that your dad sells down at the store." "No, ma'am, that's not it." She tasted it again and said, "Well, is that some of, maybe that's some of the rum that your dad has?" The little boy said, "No, ma'am. No, ma'am, that's not what it is. I brought you a puppy." Now, the point of that is that things are not always as they seem. And even in watching the news coverage of CPAC, I was listening to people talk about how that the Republican Party is passé. These are days in which we can just pretty well fold our tents because it's all over. And I just want you to know, somebody's licking the bottom of the box. But it is not what it seems. Without needing passports or hiring a moving van, we all find ourselves in a very unfamiliar and even an unwelcome place. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics may be dead, but the Union of American Socialist Republics is being born. Now, even Obama Week, formerly known as Newsweek, said so on their recent cover. We are all socialists now. And as a country, we've gone from being free market conservatives to being nationalizing socialists faster than the market dives after a Tim TurboTax Geithner economic proclamation, or faster than Nancy Pelosi jumping out of her chair hearing the president speak. We can't blame all of the current situation on the Democrats. was our Republican president and our Republican Treasury Secretary who said that the world would come to an end if they didn't get $700 billion right now to buy up troubled assets. And sadly, the party of Ronald Reagan suddenly became the party of Chicken Little. And when we needed deliberation, we got desperation. When we needed prudence, we got panic. They pulled the tarp over our eyes. And now we've got a brand new spending bill that we just passed so hurriedly by Congress that they didn't even have time to read it, didn't even have time to give it a name, so I decided I would give it one. I call it the Congressional Recovery Action Plan. Because we all know that it is pure Congressional Recovery Action Plan and smells like Congressional Recovery Action Plan. In Congress who did oppose the TARP said, why don't we just take a few deep breaths and think this through? There were congressional heroes like the man who preceded me at this podium, one of my favorite members of Congress, Mike Pence, who offered alternatives that had less taxpayer money at risk, but they were spurned by both President Bush and Senator McCain. With all due respect, Senator McCain dramatically suspended his campaign, flew back to Washington, not to champion those congressional Republicans, but to join meekly Barack Obama in voting for the bailout, a bailout that most Americans opposed. Now, like a good soldier, I continued on to the campaign for the ticket, worked hard for it, especially in light of the alternative. But I'll tell you, that moment was not our best moment. It would have been our best shot at winning the White House, a chance to offer a true, authentic, conservative choice rather than a big government echo with a neat, me too way of doing things. We missed our chance. So instead, we passed a $700 billion bill and gave half of it to save civilization as we know it by buying the toxic assets, poisoning the system. Only they didn't really buy those assets. No, they pulled a bait and switch. And they did things that they hadn't even mentioned, like buying shares in faltering banks, like a bailout for automakers. Then they ran through $350 billion of that money in a couple of months, and the economy continued to go down the tubes, credit not easing, and then they came back and said they needed another $350 billion, so, well, you can guess it, so they could buy up those troubled assets. Meanwhile, what happened to the first $350 billion? Well, we don't know where it all went, but we know about some of it. We know that we got about $66 in value for every $100 that we paid out. We know that the money didn't even go to the appropriate entities. Instead of going directly to the banks that actually make loans to businesses and customers, it went to the bank holding companies who don't. Of the $90 billion given to the 4 largest bank companies, only $15 billion ever got to the banks. And we know that Merrill Lynch spent about 40% of its initial TARP money on bonuses to the geniuses who got us into this mess, just before they announced more than $15 billion in fourth quarter losses. We also know that Wall Street gave out about $20 billion in bonuses. And I want to be very clear, because I've been accused of something that's not true. Look, I don't have a problem with bonuses. I just have a problem with taxpayers paying for the bonuses, especially to people who flew their companies into the ground rather than make them successful. Since these people created really what amounted to phony wealth, we should have paid them in monopoly money and let them reap what they sowed with phony money. During the campaign, I was often excoriated by many writers, especially some of the conservative writers who love to label me a populist or question my conservatism, because I dared say, which I did, that there was a Wall Street to Washington axis of power that was out of control.